The rise of Japan, from isolation to empire. For centuries, Japan remained isolated from the outside world, carefully preserving its traditions and culture. But in the mid-19th century, everything changed. With the arrival of Western powers, Japan was forced to open its doors, sparking a period of rapid transformation known as the Meiji Restoration. Determined to avoid colonization, Japan modernized its economy, military, and society. Within decades, it emerged as a formidable empire, expanding its influence across Asia and reshaping the balance of power. Picture this. In 1853, American Commodore Matthew Perry's black ships appeared off the coast of Japan like harbingers from another world. The Japanese, who had deliberately cut themselves off from global contact for over 2 centuries, watched in stunned silence as steam-powered vessels, something they had never seen, anchored in their waters. What happened next would be one of history's most extraordinary transformations. A feudal island nation would rocket from medieval isolation to global superpower in just 50 years. But how does a country that banned foreign contact become an empire that would challenge the West at its own game? The sleeping giant awakens. For 264 years, Japan had been the ultimate introvert among nations. The Tokugawa shogunate's sakoku policy had sealed the archipelago tighter than a vault, allowing only minimal Dutch and Chinese trade through the tiny port of Dejima. While Europe industrialized and America expanded westward, Japan remained frozen in time, a land of samurai, rice paddies, and ancient traditions. But here's the first twist in our tale. This isolation wasn't born of ignorance or fear. It was a calculated strategy. The Tokugawa rulers had witnessed what European colonialism did to their Asian neighbors and made a chilling calculation. Better to remain backward than become enslaved. They had watched the Dutch systematically dismantle Indonesian kingdoms, seen the British carve up India, and observed Spanish missionaries undermining local authorities across Asia. Their response? Slam the door shut and throw away the key. Yet Perry's arrival shattered this carefully constructed bubble in a matter of days. His letter from President Millard Fillmore was polite, but the message was clear. Open your ports, or we'll open them for you. The shogun's advisors looked at those black ships with their massive cannons and made a sobering realization. Japan's medieval military stood no chance against Western industrial might. The Meiji miracle, transformation at lightning speed. What followed was nothing short of miraculous. In 1868, a group of young samurai overthrew the shogunate and restored the teenage Emperor Meiji to power. But here's where the story becomes truly fascinating. Instead of retreating further into isolation, these revolutionaries made the most audacious decision in Japanese history. They would beat the West at its own game. The Meiji oligarchs launched what historians call the greatest modernization project ever attempted. Their motto was brutally simple: Fukoku Kyohei, rich country, strong army. But the method was pure genius. Rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, they systematically studied every aspect of Western civilization and cherry-picked the best elements for Japan. They sent delegations across the globe like intellectual pirates, stealing ideas with shameless efficiency. The Iwakura mission of 1871 to 1873 spent nearly 2 years touring America and Europe, studying everything from parliamentary systems to steel mills. They dissected the German Constitution, analyzed British naval strategy, examined French legal codes, and scrutinized American industrial techniques. Back home, the transformation was breathtaking. In 1872, Japan had virtually no railways. By 1900, it had thousands of miles of track. Traditional Han domains were abolished and replaced with modern prefectures. The samurai class, Japan's warrior nobility for over a millennium, was eliminated overnight. Feudalism was replaced with capitalism, isolation with aggressive diplomacy, and medieval warfare with modern military might. The education revolution, forging a new nation. But here's the secret weapon that made it all possible: education. The Meiji leaders understood something profound. You can't build a modern nation with a medieval mindset. So they launched the most ambitious education campaign in human history. The 1872 Education System Edict declared that there should be no community with an illiterate family, nor a family with an illiterate person. This wasn't just rhetoric. Within 30 years, Japan achieved near-universal literacy, a feat that had taken centuries in Europe. Children who might once have spent their lives tending rice paddies were now learning mathematics, science, and Western languages. Japanese students were sent abroad in unprecedented numbers, while foreign experts, the famous Oyatoi Gaikokujin, were brought to Japan to teach everything from engineering to military tactics. The country became a massive learning laboratory, absorbing knowledge with the intensity of a sponge. The military metamorphosis, from samurai to modern army. The military transformation was equally dramatic. The traditional samurai warriors, with their elaborate armor and ancestral swords, gave way to a modern conscript army equipped with the latest Western weapons and tactics. The Japanese studied Prussian military organization, British naval strategy, and French artillery techniques with scientific precision. This new military was about to be tested in ways that would shock the world. In 1894–95, Japan fought China, the Middle Kingdom that had dominated East Asia for millennia, and won decisively. Western observers were stunned. How had this recently feudal nation defeated the massive Chinese empire? But the real earthquake came in 1904–1905, when Japan took on the Russian Empire, a European great power, and emerged victorious. The Battle of Tsushima, where Admiral Togo's fleet annihilated the Russian Baltic Fleet, sent shockwaves around the globe. For the first time in centuries, an Asian nation had defeated a European power in a major war. The dark turn. From student to rival. Yet here lies the tragic irony of Japan's rise. The same efficiency, discipline, and determination that had enabled its miraculous modernization would eventually drive it toward imperialism and ultimately toward catastrophic confrontation with the very nations it had initially sought to emulate. Japan's leaders had learned Western lessons perhaps too well. They observed that every great power had an empire, that industrial nations needed raw materials and markets, and that in the global hierarchy, you were either predator or prey. So Japan began building its own empire, annexing Korea, colonizing Taiwan, and establishing a sphere of influence in Manchuria. The student had become the rival, and the West began to view Japan not as an inspiring success story, but as a threatening competitor. The very qualities that had made Japan's modernization possible, unity of purpose, unwavering discipline, and absolute devotion to national goals, would eventually lead it down the path toward Pearl Harbor and total war. The eternal paradox. The rise of Japan presents us with one of history's most compelling paradoxes. A nation that had deliberately isolated itself from the world became one of its most dynamic participants. A feudal society transformed itself into an industrial powerhouse virtually overnight. A country that had learned everything from the West would eventually challenge Western dominance in the most devastating way possible. The black ships that had once seemed like harbingers of doom became catalysts for one of history's most remarkable transformations. In just 5 decades, Japan had evolved from a hermit kingdom into a global empire, proving that with sufficient will and wisdom, even the most fundamental change is possible. But perhaps the most haunting question remains. Was Japan's tragic collision course with the West inevitable from the moment it decided to match Western power? Or could this extraordinary nation have found a different path, one that combined its remarkable capacity for transformation with a more peaceful vision of its place in the world? The rise of Japan reminds us that history's greatest transformations often carry within them the seeds of their own destruction, and that the line between adaptation and ambition can be perilously thin.